Shalom, and welcome to Hebrew Bible Secrets with your host, Rabbi Beaton. We are reading today from the book of Acts, starting at chapter 7. Acts, chapter 7, verse 1. 1. Then the Kohen Haggadol, high priest, said, "Are these things true?" 2. And he said, "Men, brothers, and Avot, fathers, listen. The Elohim of glory appeared to our Av, Abraham, when he was in Mesopotamia, before he dwelt in Haran." 3. And he said to him, "Get out from your country and from your relatives, and come into the land which I shall show you." 4. Then he came out of the land of the Kasdim, and dwelt in Haran, and from there when his Ab was dead, he removed him into his land, wherein you now dwell. 5. And he gave him no inheritance in it, no, not so much as to set his foot on. Yet he promised that he would give it to him for a possession, and to his descendants after him, when as yet he had no child. 6. And Elohim spoke on this way, that his descendants should sojourn in a foreign land, and that they should bring them into slavery, and treat them with evil for 400 years. 7. And the nation to whom they shall be in slavery will I judge, said Elohim, and after that shall they come out and serve me in this place. 8. And he gave him the covenant of circumcision. And so Abraham begot Yitzhak, Isaac, and circumcised him the 8th day. And Yitzhak, Isaac, begot Yaakov, and Yaakov begot the 12 patriarchs. 9. And the patriarchs moved with envy, sold Joseph into Mitzrayim, Egypt, but Elohim was with him. 10. And rescued him out of all his afflictions, and gave him favor and wisdom in the sight of Pharaoh, king of Mitzrayim, Egypt, and made him governor over Mitzrayim, Egypt, and all his Beth house. 11. Now there came a famine over all the land of Mitzrayim, Egypt, and Canaan, and great affliction, and our Avot fathers found no sustenance. 12. But when Yaakov heard that there was grain in Mitzrayim, Egypt, he sent out our Avot fathers first. 13. And at that time Joseph was made known to his brothers, and Joseph's family was made known to Pharaoh. 14. Then Joseph sent and called his Av, Yaakov, to him, and all his family, 75 in all. 15. So Yaakov went down to Mitzrayim, Egypt, and he died, and our Avot fathers died. 16. And were carried over into Shechem, and laid in the tomb that Abraham bought for a sum of money from the sons of Camor, the Av of Shechem. 17. But when the time of the promise drew near, which Elohim had sworn to Abraham, the people grew and multiplied in Mitzrayim, Egypt. 18. Till another king arose, this knew not Joseph. 19. The same dwelt treacherously with our family, and treated them with evil, our Avot fathers, so that they cast out their young children, to the end they might not live. 20. In which time Moshe, Musa, was born and was exceedingly fair, and nourished up in his Av's Beth house for 3 months. 21. And when he was cast out, Pharaoh's daughter took him up and nourished him for her own son. 22. And Moshe, Musa, was learned in all the wisdom of the Egyptians, and was mighty in words and in deeds. 23. And when he was 40 years old, it came into his heart to visit his brothers, the children of Israel. 24. And seeing one of them suffering wrong, he defended him, and avenged him that was oppressed, and killed the Egyptian. 25. For he supposed his brothers would have understood how that Elohim by his hand would rescue them, but they understood not. 26. And the next day he showed himself to them as they strove, and would have set them at one again, saying, Men, you are brothers, why do you wrong one another? 27. But he that did his neighbour wrong thrust him away, saying, Who made you ruler and judge over us? 28. Will you kill me as you did the Egyptian yesterday? 29. Then Moshe, Musa, fled at this saying, and was a stranger in the land of Midian, where he begot 2 sons. 30. And when 40 years had ended, there appeared to him in the wilderness of Mount Sinai a malak in a flame of fire in a bush. 31. When Musa saw it, he wondered at the sight, and as he drew near to behold it, the voice of Yahweh came to him. 32. Saying, I am the Elohim of your Avot, fathers, the Elohim of Abraham, and the Elohim of Yitzhak, Isaac, and the Elohim of Yaakov. Then Musa trembled, and dared not to look more closely. 33. Then said Yahweh to him, take off your sandals from your feet, for the place where you stand is set apart ground. 34. I have seen the affliction of my people, who are in Mitzrayim, Egypt, and I have heard their groaning, and have come down to rescue them. And now, come, I will send you into Mitzrayim, Egypt. 35. This Musa, whom they refused, saying, who made you ruler and judge? The same did Elohim send to be a ruler and a rescuer by the hand of the malak, which appeared to him in the bush. 36. He brought them out. After that, he had showed wonders and signs in the land of Mitzrayim, Egypt, and in the sea of reeds, and in the wilderness 40 years. 37. This is that Musa, which said to the children of Israel, a prophet shall Elohim raise up to you of your brothers, like to me. 38. This is he that was in the congregation in the wilderness, with the malak, which spoke to him in the Mount Sinai, and with our Avot fathers, who received the lively oracles to give to us. 39. To whom our Avot fathers would not obey, but thrust him from them, and in their hearts turned back again into Mitzrayim, Egypt. 40. Saying to Aaron, make us mighty ones to go before us. For as for this Musa, which brought us out of the land of Mitzrayim, Egypt, we do not know what is become of him. 41. And they made a calf in those days, and offered sacrifice to the idol, and rejoiced in the works of their own hands. 42. Then Elohim turned, and gave them up to pay homage to the host of Shemayim, as it is written in the scrolls of the prophets. O you Beth Israel, house of Israel, have you offered to me slain beasts and sacrifices by the space of 40 years in the wilderness? 43. Yes, you took up the tent of Moloch, and the star of your Elohim, Remphan, figures which you made to pay homage to them, and I will carry ye away beyond Babylon. 44. Our Avot fathers had the tent of witness in the wilderness, as he had appointed, speaking to Musa, that he should make it according to the fashion that he had seen. 45. Which also our Avot fathers that came after brought in with Yahushua, son of Nun, into the possession of the Gentiles, whom Elohim drove out before the face of our Avot fathers to the days of David. 46. Who found favor before Elohim and desired to find a tent for the Elohim of Yaakov. 47. But Shlomo built him a Beth Hamikdash, the first temple. 48. But the Most High does not dwell in temples made with hands, as said the prophet. 49. The Shemayim is my throne, and earth is my footstool. What Beth house will you build for me, said Yahweh, or what is the place of my rest? 50. Has not my hand made all these things? 51. You stubborn and uncircumcised in heart and ears, you do always resist the Ruach HaKadosh, set apart spirit, as your Avot fathers did, so do you. 52. Which of the prophets have not your Avot fathers persecuted? And they have slain them, who showed before of the coming of the Zadik one, of whom you have been now the betrayers and murderers. 53. Who have received the Torah, as did the Malakim, and some who have not guarded it. 54. When they heard these things, they were cut to the heart, and they gnashed on him with their teeth. 55. But he, being full of the Ruach HaKadosh, set apart spirit, looked up steadfastly into the Shamayim, and saw the glory of Elohim and Yehoshua standing on the right hand of Elohim. 56. And said, Behold, I see Shamayim opened, and the Son of Man standing on the right hand of Elohim. 57. Then they cried out with a loud voice, and stopped their ears, and ran upon him with one accord. 58. And cast him out of the city, and stoned him. And the witnesses laid down their clothes at a young man's feet, whose name was Shaul. 59. And they stoned Stephania, Stephen, calling upon Elohim and saying, Master Yehoshua, receive my Ruach, my spirit. 60. And he kneeled down and cried with a loud voice, Master, lay not this sin to their charge. And when he had said this, he fell asleep. Okay, so that now brings us to the end of Acts chapter 7. So let's go back and have a look at some of the footnotes in Acts chapter 7. Okay, so just to remind you, I am reading from the Hidden Truths Hebraic Scrolls, the Tanakh with commentary. Which can be found on Amazon. Okay, so let's go to the first footnote. So the first footnote is in verse 2. And he said, Men, brothers, and Avot fathers, listen, the Elohim of glory appeared to our Av, Abraham, when he was in Mesopotamia. Okay, so let's have a look at this, Mesopotamia. So Abraham was born and brought up in southeastern Turkey, not Iraq. Okay, so Abraham was brought up in southeastern Turkey and not Iraq. Okay, let's go to the next footnote, which is in verse 4. Then he came out of the land of the Kasdim. So let's have a look at this, land of the Kasdim. So these people were also in southeastern Turkey and later occupied Iraq regions. Okay. So let's go to the next footnote, which is in verse 14. Then Joseph sent and called his Av, Yaakov, to him, and all his family, 75 in all. Okay, so let's have a look at this, 75 in all. So in Hebrew, Torah of Genesis 46:27 and Exodus 1 and 5, we have a count of 70. However, if we look at the Greek texts of Exodus 1 and 5 and some other scrolls that were found in Qumran, we note a reading of 75 instead of 70. One must understand that different scribes count in different ways, and it is actually okay. Even Moses did this. We find that in Genesis 46:26, where the count given was 66, and not 70 as in Exodus 1 and 5. Now how then can we arrive at 75? This is quite easy. If you think that we have 66 in Genesis 46:26, therefore we add the 9 wives of the sons, then we get the figure of 75. One might wonder, why 9 wives and why not 12? This again is very simple. We cannot count Joseph's wife, as she did not leave Israel to go to Egypt, which leaves us only 11 sons. Shimeon's wife was dead, and Benjamin was not yet married, so we are left with 9 wives, which completes the count. Once we understand this, then we know that there is actually no contradiction. Some people count the grandsons of Joseph, but in our opinion, this opinion is incorrect, for several reasons, too numerous to mention here. Some people also use solely the Septuagint to make up the figure. This too has problems, and once again, we cannot give you all the reasons here, because the Septuagint was partially corrupted by Christians, so it is simplest to know, taking Moses and his words as authoritative. Genesis 46:26 already tells us the obvious, that 66, excluding the wives, then we do not have to run to different conclusions. Just add the 9 wives and we arrive home. The 5 extra names in the Septuagint are a late forgery in the 2nd century CE, translated by Aquila, Symmachus, and Theodotion. Okay, so let's go to the next footnote, which is in verse 15. So Yaakov went down into Mitzrayim, Egypt, and he died. So let's have a look at this, and he died. Many people ascribe this as a contradiction, but the Greek text does not contradict, which says Yaakov died in Egypt. He indeed died in Egypt, so we have no contradiction. Please see next footnote for the rest. Okay, so let's go to the next footnote, which is in verse 16. And were carried over into Shechem. So let's have a look at this, carried over into Shechem. So the people that were carried over were the fathers, that are Joseph and the 11 sons, excluding Jacob. Okay, so let's go to the next footnote, which is a continuation. And were carried over into Shechem, and laid in the tomb that Abraham bought for a sum of money from the sons of Camor. Okay, for a sum of money. So let's have a look at this. So we have here, many people get confused here and think this is a major contradiction. Here, that somehow Jacob was to be buried in Shechem, while it was common knowledge that he was buried in Hebron. How can Shechem and Hebron be the same, as they are at least 50 miles apart? Is this a major contradiction or a misunderstanding of the text? Also, did he not say that Abraham purchased the land in Shechem and not Hebron? Let us examine this together. They think that Zephaniah, Stephen, made a mistake of misquoting the text of the place of burial and purchase of the land. If we read the text in the ancient Greek construct, we have a leading scholar of the 19th century by the name of J.W. McGarvey, or MacGarvey, who in his book, The Lands of the Bible, states the following. Start quote. As the 2 clauses stand in our version, he died himself, and our fathers, and they were carried over into Shechem. There can be no doubt that himself and fathers are common subjects of one verb, died, and that the pronoun they before were carried refers to both alike. But it is not so in the original. The construction is different. The verb rendered died is in the singular number, etelutism, and it agrees only with Ortus himself. The plural substantive fathers is not the subject of that verb, but of the plural etelutism, understood. The construction having been changed with the introduction of the plural subject, it follows that the plural verb metatatism, were carried, belongs to fathers and not to Jacob. The two clauses properly punctuated, and with the ellipsis supplied, read thus: and he died, and our fathers died, and were carried over into Shechem. With this rendering and punctuation, which are certainly admissible, the contradiction totally disappears. And if the passage had been thus rendered at first into English, a contradiction would not have been thought of. 1892, page 121. Emphasis, mine. End quote. So what do we have in the text? Jacob died in Egypt? There is no contradiction there. The next construct in Greek that the scribe used shows that the next bit of the verse applies to the fathers, but excluding Jacob. So which fathers did it refer to? Was Abraham buried there? We know Abraham was buried in Hebron. Some of the fathers were indeed buried in Shechem, and Stephen was not talking about Jacob or Abraham. Joshua 24:32 tells us that Joseph was indeed buried in Shechem, and one of the fathers of our faith. Some Hebrew historians, such as Kuninoel, state that the 12 patriarchs were not buried in Hebron, as properly believed, but Shechem. This is indeed true, that when they left Egypt, they also brought the bodies of the 12 sons of Jacob and buried them in Shechem. This shows that this verse, translation and understanding, has created a problem for later generations and was not translated correctly. And Stephen did not make an incorrect statement. To understand the next fact, we have to look at the history of Israel, the Hebrew people versus the Samaritans. Remember the story of the Good Samaritan and the fact that there was enmity between the two groups, as the Samaritans were not seen as good people by the Hebrew people in Judea. Even Josephus wrote what was properly believed at the time and wanted to distance himself from the Samaritans, since he was from the priestly line. Then this suddenly explains why we find the idea of the fathers being buried in Shechem is not liked by the Hebrew people, since Shechem was controlled by the Samaritans. This is why this was an undesirable and unpopular thing to say. Now imagine Stephen saying this, and how unpopular it was that he got stoned for it. What about the purchase of the land? Abraham indeed purchased the land to build his altar in Shechem. We know this is true because you are not allowed to just go to a new place where people already live and just squat on the land like a gypsy. You in fact have to purchase the land. We saw how King David also purchased the place of Jerusalem to lay offerings before Yahweh. 2 Samuel 24:24. One may ask, but did not Elohim give Israel the whole land? Then answer this one. Why did the Hebrew people have to purchase the land from the Muslim landowners during the time of Kurdi, Saladin, Abi, and also when the Turks occupied parts of Israel and were absentee landowners? We also know that when Abraham arrived in Shechem, he built an altar to Yahweh, Genesis 12:8. But he did not stay in the land after his purchase for this altar. It is clear that the Torah mentions building an altar, because we know you do not build an altar on a piece of land that belongs to the Canaanite people. So it is inferred that Abraham purchased this land while Jacob merely repurchased the land. Abraham had to have a title deed, but over time it was reoccupied by the local people, hence why we see Jacob repurchasing it to claim title back. The other thing is this about the purchase of the land by Jacob and Abraham can easily be reconciled to, as I explained earlier, the Muslims settled in what was the land of the Hebrew nation, but the Hebrew nation had to purchase their land back from the Muslim absentee landowners. What we see here are two separate accounts of purchases made by Abraham. One might argue that the only two places are 50 miles apart. How could this be? This is no problem, as people did own lands in different areas. The author's father owned land in Lahore and also owned land hundreds of miles away in another completely different district without even living there. So this is not a contradiction. First of all, Jacob did buy a piece of land in Shechem, mentioned in Genesis 33:19. This is very easy to understand as follows. We know that Jacob did buy two pieces of land, one in Hebron, Genesis 23:17, and the other in Shechem, Genesis 33:19. The text in Acts 7:14 tells us that Abraham purchased a piece of land in Shechem. Just because the Torah does not mention Abraham purchasing the land in Shechem, that does not mean that he did not purchase it. In fact, he did. If you look at the text in Genesis 12:8, it is quite apparent that Abraham built an altar and worshipped Yahweh in Shechem. How did he manage to put an altar upon foreign ground when people would kill you for taking one little bit that belonged to them? Think about it. This is clearly hinted that he may have purchased this land from Hamor. So it shows us that Stephen knew something that we did not until he told us. And we find no objection raised by the local Hebrew Torah experts, since the statement was indeed true. We see the Hebrew people and Muslims fighting today to say who owns the land of Israel. This completely reconciles our accounts, showing no contradiction whatsoever. Okay, so let's go to the next footnote, which is in verse 30. And when 40 years had ended, there appeared to him in the wilderness of Mount Sinai and Malak. Okay, so it reads, the Malak, Yahweh, speaking from the bush. Okay, so this is the Malak Yahweh speaking from the bush. Okay, so let's go to the next footnote, which is in verse 32, saying, I am the Elohim of your Avot fathers, the Elohim of Abraham, and the Elohim of Yitzhak, Isaac, and the Elohim of Yaakov. Then Moshe, Musa, trembled, and dared not to look more closely. So let's have a look at this. So Moses knew Torah, that to look upon Yahweh meant death, hence why he did not want to look. Okay, so let's go to the next footnote, which is in verse 33. Then said Yahweh to him, take off your sandals from your feet, for the place where you stand is set apart ground. Okay, so let's have a look at this. Take off your sandals. So we have here, sandals were made of leather from a dead animal, which was not permitted in the place of Yahweh, where his glory appeared. Okay, so let's go to the next footnote, which is in 37. This is that Musa, which said to the children of Israel, a prophet shall Elohim raise up to you of your brothers, like me, or like to me. So let's have a look at this. So quoted from Deuteronomy 18 and 18. Okay, so let's have a look at Deuteronomy 18 and 18 quickly. So Deuteronomy 18 and 18, and it reads, I will raise them up a prophet from among their brethren like you, and will put my words in his mouth, and he shall speak to them all that I shall command him. Okay, so we have a couple of footnotes here. So I will raise them up a prophet. So let's have a look at this. So this was not Muhammad, as the Muslims claim. See Islam, Peace or Beast, written by Rabbi Simon Altaf, which you can get on Amazon. Okay, so the next footnote would be from among their brethren. So let's have a look at this. So the prophet, the Hebrew word is Navi, N-A-V-I, and not Ha-Navi. So it's not relating to a singular figure, but to all future prophets of Israel who would speak the words of Yahweh and be Yahweh's mouthpiece, so to speak, and do miracles likewise. See Isaiah 59:21 and Jeremiah 1 and 9. The term here is related to establishing the office of a prophet, as to who can be a prophet and who cannot be a prophet. In Deuteronomy 18, Israel was being warned not to indulge in black magic, sorcery, mediums for their answers to prayers, but look to the guidance of the prophets. Jesus, Yeshua, could fit the prophet spoken of in Deuteronomy 18 and 15. Okay, so we have another footnote, like you. So let's have a look at this. So same black color as Moshe, Musa, Moses. So the same black color as Moshe, Musa, and Moses. So Moses was black in skin color, or dark brown. Okay, so we have one more footnote. I will put my words in his mouth. Okay, his mouth. So let's have a look at this. So the office of prophet, which applies to all future called out prophets, teaching Torah and are greater than the king of the land. Okay? So anybody who teaches Torah is greater than the king of the land. Okay? So let's go to the next footnote in verse 38. This is he that was in the congregation in the wilderness with the Malak, which spoke to him in the Mount Sinai, and with our Avot, fathers. Okay, so let's have a look at this. Congregation in the wilderness. So clear evidence that the Qahal, or congregation, did not start in Acts 2, but in the wilderness. There is no word church in the man-made New Testament, but is a false word. The word here was Ita, or the Hebrew Qahal. Even the Greek word ecclesia does not mean church, but it means called out ones. The only called out ones are Israel. So if you want to be partakers of the covenant of Yahweh, then be part of the chosen tribes of Israel by joining and keeping Torah with Israel. Okay? So you have to join on to Israel to be part of the covenants. So let's go to the next footnote, which is in verse 40. Saying to Aaron, make us mighty ones. So let's have a look at this quickly. So mighty ones means here false Elohim. Okay, so false gods. Okay, so let's go to the next footnote, which is in verse 41. And they made a calf in those days, and offered sacrifice to the idol, and rejoiced in the works of their own hands. Let's have a look at this. So many people today make the same mistake of making man-made objects and then worshipping them. Christians are guilty of resurrecting false faiths like these people did, and then celebrating them and claiming it glorifies the Creator. But they are actually an abomination to Him. Okay? So they're actually abomination to Elohim, to the Creator. Okay, so let's go to the next footnote, which is in verse 43. Yes, you took up the tent of Moloch. So let's have a look at this. So many join into this evil tent, not knowing what they are doing by sacrificing their sons and daughters. The radical Islamists have done just that. Okay, so let's go to the next footnote, which is a continuation. And the star. So yes, you took up the tent of Moloch and the star. So let's have a look at this. So this is not the Star of David. Okay. So let's go to the next footnote, which is in verse 44. Our Avot fathers had the tent of witness. So let's have a look at this. So witness of Yahweh's Torah and the testimonies of the fathers, who were into patriarchal marriages. They trustworthily kept the Torah that many shun in their churches today. In these churches, abortion is only the removal of an unwanted child, committing mass murder, which is technically also the congregation of Moloch. Child sacrifice introduced by Satan. It's best to leave these places as quick as possible, not to bring upon yourself the curses that will descend upon them. So let's go to the next footnote, which is in verse 45, which also our Avot fathers that came after brought in with Yahshua, son of Nun. So let's have a look at this, Yahshua. So we have here the King James Version translators made a mistake of translating the name of Yahshua into Jesus, which later helped us to know that his name was spelt in Hebrew, just like Joshua, son of Nun, in the form of Yeshua or Yahushua, and not Yeshua, neither Jesu or Jesus, or any other variant. Okay, so Yahushua is his name, which they turned into Jesus. Okay, so let's go to the next footnote, which is in verse 52. Which of the prophets have not your Avot fathers persecuted? And they have slain them, which showed before of the coming of the Sadiq one. Okay, let's have a look at this. So highly esoteric term that the ancient rabbis understood as the middle pillar, the gateway to Malkut, the kingdom of the Father. Okay, so the middle pillar is, we're talking here, Yahushua. Okay, so let's go to the next footnote, which is in verse 55. But he, being full of the Ruach HaKadosh, set apart spirit, looked up steadfastly into the Shamayim, the heaven, and saw the glory of Elohim, and Yahushua standing on the right hand. Okay, so let's have a look at this. So, judgment side of Yahweh. Okay, so the right hand is the judgment side of Yahweh. Okay, so let's go to the next footnote, which is in verse 58. And cast him out of the city, and stoned him. Okay, so let's have a look at this, stoned him. Yahushua too was stoned on the tree by the Jews who were against him, testified by Paulus, because he had the stoning marks on his body and nearly blinded in the eyes. Okay, so that now brings us to the end of Acts chapter 7. So I thank you all for watching, and I hope to see you on the other side. This is Rabbi Beaton saying thank you for watching, and shalom shalom. Baruch Shem Kivot Malkuto Leolam Va'ed. Benevolent be the name of his esteemed kingdom, forever and ever and ever. Amen.